Captain Marvel is the new 2019 character debut for Marvel Studios, set to enter the Marvel Cinematic Universe with her very own film. She was teased at the end of Infinity War, and the project has been in development for years. But with all the advertising and hype, many people are still wondering, who the hell is Captain Marvel anyway? What's her deal? Even when we were getting introduced to characters like Hawkeye and Black Panther, there was some chance that you might know them from the video games, cartoons, and other material that came out over Marvel's long history. But Captain Marvel is ironically kind of new to the company she's named after, at least this version. Carol Danvers, the character in the titular role, has actually been around for decades, but she only recently became Captain Marvel and is actually the 7th character to hold the title. Well, the 7th to be created by Marvel at least. The movie will undoubtedly condense the brand's long and convoluted timeline to a drastic degree, but for those who are curious about the weird comic book history that came before, stay tuned as we dive into the history of Captain Marvel. Marvels, plural. The first Captain Marvel we'll be covering isn't actually owned by Marvel. If you saw the trailers for Captain Marvel, you might have seen the trailers for Shazam, too. This film is being released by DC Comics, Marvel's competitor, and oddly enough, Shazam's original name was Captain Marvel as well. Yes, Marvel and DC both have movies about a Captain Marvel coming out the exact same year. So why is DC's Captain Marvel not actually called Captain Marvel in this movie? Did Marvel sue DC for stealing their name? Well, kinda. There's a lot of weird legal stuff involved with this story, but ironically, Shazam was called Captain Marvel way before Marvel Comics was even called Marvel. This story dates all the way back to the late 1930s, not too long after Superman was created. Superman was owned by DC, and he basically kickstarted the superhero genre single-handedly. Other companies wanted to cash in on Superman's success, and a lot of the wannabes came too close for DC's comfort. And one of these wannabes was Captain Marvel. The character was created by writer Bill Parker and artist C.C. Beck, with directions from the higher-ups to create a competitor for Superman. DC owns the character nowadays, but originally he was owned by Fawcett Comics. Part of the reason DC got the rights to Captain Marvel was actually the dispute over him being too similar to Superman. DC sued Fawcett in 1941, and it would take almost a decade for the case to be eventually settled out of court. To be fair to DC, Captain Marvel did look like Superman, had somewhat similar powers, was a reporter in his secret identity, and his main enemy was an evil bald scientist too. Yeah, Luthor was just a mad scientist back then. Plot-wise, the character didn't really resemble Superman at all. The premise focused on a young boy named Billy Batson, who was granted magic powers by a wizard named Shazam. By saying the wizard's name, Billy could transform into the adult superhero Captain Marvel. The word Shazam was an anagram of the 6 beings that granted him powers: the wisdom of Solomon, the strength of Hercules, the stamina of Atlas, the power of Zeus, the courage of Achilles, and the speed of Mercury. So he had Superman's speed and strength, but he also had lightning powers. Kinda. Until the modern age, he only really summoned lightning when transforming from Billy into Marvel. So functionally, yeah, he had the same powers as Superman. The series was very successful during World War II, to the point it even outsold Superman from time to time. Both series sold about 1 million copies per issue, but Marvel was able to reach 1.3 million at certain points. The success of the series led to Captain Marvel getting his own Marvel family in order to expand the franchise. Billy Batson was able to share his powers with his sister Mary and his disabled friend Freddie Freeman, so they could become superheroes as well. Mary became Mary Marvel, and Freddie became Captain Marvel Jr. Captain Marvel even got his own animal spin-off, Hoppy the Marvel Bunny. The DC settlement in the early 1950s ended Fawcett's involvement with the character, though this decision was also caused by superhero comics in general waning in popularity at the time. Fawcett felt it was not worth continuing the fight, and ended up shutting down its comic division in 1953. The character of Captain Marvel, though, still had some demand. One company that tried to fill the niche was MF Enterprises in 1966. Their initials were appropriate because their attempt at Captain Marvel was pretty questionable. Their Captain Marvel was very different conceptually from the classic version. Their interpretation was an android who could detach his limbs and then fire them at his opponents. He still activated his powers by yelling out a word though. In this case, he yelled out, "Split!" to detach his limbs and "Zam!" to reattach them, for some reason. Even though the character was overall different, the name would still have been a copyright violation, but Fawcett really wasn't around to press the issue, and the trademark had lapsed by this point. Except Captain Marvel wasn't the only character this series ripped off. The 2 other big knockoffs were 2 villains called the Bat and Plastic Man. There were such blatant infringements that they actually got MF into some legal problems with DC. The Bat had to become the Ray, and Plastic Man had to become Elastic Man. Because of the legal issues, this knockoff Captain Marvel didn't last too long. He only appeared in about 6 issues before the company as a whole shut down. A more successful Captain Marvel knockoff was created in the UK almost immediately after the original's cancellation. This version was called Marvel Man, and was created by a small publisher called L. Miller & Son. L. Miller & Son got their start publishing black and white reprints of Fawcett's Captain Marvel comics in the UK. With Fawcett gone, they basically continued as if nothing happened except a name change. Marvel Man even kept the same issue numbering as the Fawcett reprints and started with issue 25. The main difference between Marvel Man and his predecessor was that Marvel Man's power came from atomic energy granted by an astrophysicist. Instead of yelling Shazam, he yelled out the word Kimota. This catchphrase was actually just the word atomic backwards, but it has a K instead of a C, so it's cooler now, guys. Marvel Man also had his own Marvel family with sidekicks named Young Marvel Man and Kid Marvel Man. The character was successful for about a decade before UK started importing more American comic books. The black and white small-time Marvel Man couldn't compete with his full-color US competitors. The character is known more nowadays for his dark reboot in the 80s by writer of Watchmen, Alan Moore. This series featured Marvel Man regaining his childhood powers and memories as an older married man and learning the truth about the fantastic world he used to live in. It explored many themes that would be present in Watchmen and other Moore books, such as the idea of the Superman being a source of terror. The character was also renamed Miracle Man around this time to avoid legal problems from Marvel Comics. Which generally sums up how Marvel got involved in this process, because they began clamping down on anything that even had the word Marvel around the 1960s. They helped bring about the end of MF's Captain Marvel 2, when they convinced MF to cease publication in a legal settlement. That was around the time they changed their name to Marvel Comics, and they argued anything named Marvel would be associated with them, so they should have the trademark. This argument extended to them claiming that they should have the rights to Captain Marvel, or at least the name. And guess what? They won that legal battle. DC bought the rights to Captain Marvel, the character, in the early 1970s, but now they had the character, but not the trademark. This created a weird situation for DC, where every book or show that featured Captain Marvel could not be called Captain Marvel in the title. So DC decided to name these new products Shazam instead, focusing on the source of Captain Marvel's powers and his trademark catchphrase. The character was still called Captain Marvel until less than a decade ago in 2011, when DC finally conceded completely and changed the name of the character himself. This was part of a larger DC reboot that rewrote the comic history, so DC must have felt the time was right. Captain Marvel the character was now officially Shazam. So DC had the character, but not the trademark, while Marvel had the trademark looking for a character, and it took them a long time to figure out what to do with it. Like we said, the current Captain Marvel is Marvel's 7th attempt. So come join us next time for the first character who defined the name within the Captain Marvel universe, quite literally.